You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
All righty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and I am joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
Doing dandy. Watching some playoff hockey. I think this is probably, the fourth week in a row now that I've mentioned I've been watching playoff hockey. Like, it is consumed.
As you should.
It has consumed my weeknights. Like, outside of this past weekend, and by the way, if it wasn't mentioned before, happy Memorial Day. And thank you if you were...
Your fire alarm going off?
That's so. I just was trying to figure out what it was. I apologize. So back to my.
Tell your neighbor to get their brakes checked, will you?
Breakthrough, freaking labradoodle or something, man. So, again,
That'll be a new segment. Guess that sound.
No doubt. So I apologize. All right, crazy ass people. Again, happy Memorial Day. Thank you to those of you who have let loved ones join the service and lay down their lives for our freedom. Much appreciated. I realize that is now one day post Memorial Day, but nevertheless, we appreciate it, and we appreciate all of you who have chosen to serve, whether it's in our National Armed Forces or local first responders. We appreciate it. Back to playoff hockey. I love playoff hockey. Go Avs. Go Avs. Like, I've not seen any of the third period because I jumped on here. We were kind of going through our pre-show, and I think Alex is looking at it at the corner of his eye. I can see the reflection.
Corner of the eye. It's glued right in the front.
It's over.
So, but no, it was good. How was your guys' weekend? Did you guys get to do anything fun? Were you able to get out of town a little bit and enjoy a 3-day weekend, or were you guys stuck at home and in the JOB?
I was doing the JOB.
Yeah, I was also doing the JOB. I had a 3-day weekend, but I took Friday off and had to work on Memorial Day as the industry I work in warrants. There is no such thing as a holiday in television. So I was able to get Friday off, able to go see some of my future in-laws, if you will. And I also have been watching a lot of playoff hockey. It's been a fantastic playoff run for Colorado in the conference finals for the first time in 20 years, and up 1-0 after taking down Edmonton. Spoiler alert for anybody who wasn't watching. The Avs were up 7-3 at one point, and then in the blink of an eye, it was 7-6. So it's going to be a fun one. I wish one of my teams was not in this series because it would be so much fun to watch just as a pure hockey fan. But being that I am emotionally invested,
it was the Edmonton-Calgary series.
I know.
We just got to see this.
Yeah, and now we get to see two of Edmonton has arguably two of the best players in the world. Colorado also has two of the best players in the world, whereas Calgary doesn't quite have that level of talent on their team just yet. So it's just like amplified that much more. And funny you should say that, Kevin, because the one game that Calgary won, they still gave up 6 goals. Yeah, it's going to be a high-scoring series. I will tell anybody who's willing to listen, if you're just getting into hockey or a casual hockey fan or whatever, make this Colorado-Edmonton like appointment viewing. Give yourself the chance to watch this hockey game because it is, as they intended the game to be played after the lockout. It's fast, it's fun, it's high scoring, up tempo. Like, it's everything that the NHL wanted the league to become when they got rid of all the clutching and grabbing and slowing the game down after the lockout in 2004.
True. Also, on a side note, there's another Colorado team that is playing for a championship in the National Lacrosse League. The Mammoth are playing for the NLL championship, beating the San Diego Seals. I have to stay up and watch that one on ESPN Plus the other night, where the Mammoth came roaring back and ended up winning that one just before the overtime. So a lot of fun. Absolutely a lot of fun. Well, guys, any other thoughts here before we start getting into some team breakdowns?
Oh, we got some teams to break down. Let's get to it.
We got some teams. We're going to break them down. Before we get there, make sure that you're following us on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Good Old Boys FF. Make sure that you are subscribed and following us across those. We got some great content coming out there. And of course, make sure you head over to the YouTube channel, the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button. We do the show live for you every Tuesday night during the off season. Once we get in season, we're going to pick that up and get some more content offerings up there for you. But one of the biggest things that you don't want to miss on is the player profiles. Very short, bite-sized type of clips that you can watch. You can get our thoughts on a player, which really will come in handy when you're sitting there and you're on the clock and you've got you're debating between guys. You can watch a couple of minute video there between us kind of going through those guys and seeing what our thoughts on there and help you win draft day and get the ball rolling on that one. Like we always say, you can't win the your fantasy football league in your draft, but you can certainly lose it. And so those videos will help you not lose your fantasy football league on draft day. All right, let's go ahead and head on into the first team we're going to break down here. That is the Seattle Seahawks. Last year, 7-10, a 55% pass, 45% run ratio. They were ranked 16th in total points for, 20th in total yards for. The head coach, Pete Carroll, and the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron. And we're going to head right on in, start with the running back room. Rashaad Penny had a big resurgence there towards the very back half of the season, finished RB36, 119 rush attempts, 745 yards, 6 touchdowns, 6 receptions on 8 targets for an additional 48 yards. Your thoughts on Rashaad Penny?
He just got hurt again. Oh, and again. And again. One more time. Oh, yeah, and again. I realize that a lot of people are probably kind of holding on to Rashaad Penny because down the stretch last year, he was a fun DFS play, right? As he kind of took over and we saw that little stretch where he showed flashes of the guy that Seattle drafted him to be. And it's cute that people want to hold on to that. It was a facade, guys. It is a facade. The guy, he's unable to stay healthy for whatever reason. And these are soft tissue injuries. Like this is I'm going to compare it to Arian Foster. Obviously their careers are not the same, but when Arian Foster started having these soft tissue injuries, that is when his career started going downhill. Adrian Peterson can fight through an ACL tear. You can fight through a broken leg. I say fight through, recover stronger than before, right? We're waiting to see how these Achilles injuries are coming back for some of these guys that occurred last year and how that's going to work out. But these soft tissue injuries, Christian McCaffrey right now, these things are real, guys. Your muscles are not made to rip and tear and grow back together stronger. It's not calcified like a bone is, right? Like there is scar tissue there that is weakened. Unfortunately for Rashaad Penny, that's his deal. Like I am not touching this guy at all. And it's because of these soft tissue injuries. I'm officially scared and I don't want any part of it.
Yeah, I think when we get into these running backs, they're tempting because we don't really know what's going to go on at quarterback. So it kind of scares you away from some of the other positions. And if you're trying to get a piece of the Seattle offense, logic would tell you to go to the running backs or, a guy we're going to talk about later that I think we're all still pretty up on just given who he is. But I would agree with Kevin here. It's just this offense. First off, they're going to be trailing so much that the running backs aren't really going to get their run. And then they don't really have running backs that can prove that they can stay on the field for an entire season or even the 13 weeks that we need them for fantasy football or 15 weeks that we need them for fantasy football. Like you're just not getting what you need out of them. So I'm out on Rashaad Penny as well. I tried to play this game last year with with Chris Carson and Rashaad Penny and trying to, figure out, because they were just, low hanging fruit that I had there at the end of the season. But I'm out. I'm out on Rashaad Penny. We'll get to Chris Carson in a second, but I'm going to sound like a broken record once we get to him too.
Okay, I'll be the differing viewpoint here then on this one. So Rashaad Penny, I think, can return value for you in your fantasy drafts. Right now, he's coming off the board about pick 79. So that puts you, what is that, into the 7th round there, kind of mid 7th, late 7th type of pick there. And Kevin and I mentioned this last week when we were talking about these things, that there's a lot of value in the 7th round. So just based off of where he's going, I may not go there. But if he's in the 8th round when I'm on the clock, I'm probably going to go there, simply from the standpoint that he showed a lot of flash, showed a lot of really good things there. While, yes, Alex, I think you are correct that Seattle's going to be trailing. This offense is not going to be great. Pete Carroll, if nothing else, loves to run the ball and loves to pound the rock. And they went away from that a little bit, but even came back to that with a guy like Russell Wilson, who's a very competent quarterback and can be an elite level quarterback in the league. And still, they wanted to run the ball, wanted to pound the rock there. And I think that will continue there a little bit. So Rashaad Penny is probably one of the few guys in the 8th round, 7th, 8th round as a running back that could win me a week. He's got that kind of ability there, and I'll take the upside on that. Love him as a best ball play, especially kind of in that range there. But even for redraft, I'll take my shot on that one, just simply from the standpoint that he gives me some extra depth, give me some things like that. And I'll take the risk on that one, right? Because it's factored in with that 7th, 8th round pick there. And I do think that he's able to provide a lot of upside and a lot of home run type of swing there. So I will end up taking the swing on that one. Second half of the season, going down the stretch, right? Where you won your championship oftentimes was on the back of Rashaad Penny, which was, some of my championships last year came solely because Rashaad Penny coming down the stretch in week 14 was the 3rd running back. Week 16 was 9. Week 17 in championship week was the number 1 overall back. And during the second half of the season, and that was even second half of the season with him missing games, to your point, right? He missed week 10, missed week 12 there, was still the 8th overall running back there. So one of those guys that if I'm going with a 0 RB, if I need some depth there, he's a guy that I think can provide that and can get me some pretty decent value there, return on that draft pick. Any other thoughts on Rashaad Penny?
We're going to touch on the rest of the running back room here in a second.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot up in the air with Chris Carson, but I know that we all have some fairly strong opinions about this rookie running back that we're going to be touching on here in a second. And I do think all this continues to add to the reason why I'm fading Penny, because I don't think he's going to be able to hold on to a top spot, even if he's the lone healthy veteran coming into the season.
Right. I understand that one too. It's not going to surprise me if you see Rashaad Penny get around 200 total opportunities when it's all said and done, whether it's some pass game mix in there, whether it's some rushing attempts in there. Cumulatively over the course of the season, I do believe that you'll see him get at least 200 total opportunities on that one. Couple that with the fact that he's also on a prove it deal, is only on a 1-year contract. So, take a guy that's on a prove it deal and needs to play his way into another contract that late. I'll swing for some upside there. Let's go ahead and head on over to Ken Walker, who is a 2nd round pick number 41 out of Michigan State. Thoughts around Ken Walker III?
All right. So the 2nd round is kind of the new 1st round for running backs, right? We've seen this over the past couple seasons, really. Yes, Najee went in the 1st round to Pittsburgh last year, but I mean, Jonathan Taylor, right, is the big one. He's arguably the number 1 running back in fantasy football coming into this season, a 2nd round pick. And not that they're the exact same, but just the round comparison. I think Kenneth Walker is walking into, no pun intended, walking into a situation where it's ripe for the taking. right? It's his drive, it's his work ethic, it's his ability to digest a playbook, and his ability to pass pro. The Seattle Seahawks look dramatically different this year than what they did last year, mainly because there's a big change under center, right? Russell Wilson is now with our Denver Broncos, and we're not really sure who the quarterback of the Seahawks is. Is it going to be Geno? Is it going to be Drew Lock? Are they going to trade for Baker? I mean, there's lots of rumors swirling. Jimmy G, I don't see him going in the division, but stranger things have happened. So all that said, back to the running back position, Kenneth Walker is going to be able to see a lot of run. And it's not going to surprise me one bit is by the end of the season if Kenneth Walker leads the team in touches as far as the running back position goes. So drafting value, best ball, going back to your point with Rashaad Penny, maybe that works out because the 7th round is a deeper value than where you're going to see Kenneth Walker go, right? He's going a couple rounds ahead of that. But this team has to generate offense somehow. And the fact that they were drafting offensive linemen and a running back tells me that they are going back to Pete Carroll old school ground and pound football, where they're not going to be airing it out as much. They don't have to rely on a quarterback's right arm to do this for them. And so young Kenneth Walker coming out of Michigan State is lightning fast, i.e. how Penny was coming out of the draft, right? When Penny came out, he was crazy fast. Still was. We saw the breakaway speed last year. So we have a lot of speed in this backfield to go around, but Kenneth Walker does not have any type of injury history like Chris Carson or Rashaad Penny do. So you're mitigating risk. Am I going to pay up 2 rounds for a guy who I think is going to have more total touches and is more of a consistent option week in and week out? Quite possibly. I think I would rather have Kenneth Walker on my team than Rashaad Penny if I had to choose between the two, even at the premium of the rounds that I would have to pick up to get Walker.
Yeah, so I see this Seattle running back room as running back by committee, right? Like, I don't think any one guy, be it Penny, who is what's our term? Health resistant. Chris Carson, who's coming back off of neck surgery, and then Kenneth Walker. Obviously, it's tough for a rookie. There are exceptions to that, but I still think that this is a running back by committee. You know, even if they have all 3 guys healthy, which I think they would like. You know, in a perfect world, I think they would like to have all 3 guys healthy, right, and just be able to mix in what they can when they can. So, while I agree that, you know, Kenneth Walker is probably the most intriguing of the 3 because we don't know, that's also the reason why I'm a little hesitant is because of the unknown. So you get the risk. There's risk there, and sometimes that risk pays off. I'm just not so certain with this offense, you know, how he fits in, how he slots in. Especially with, again, I anticipate this team playing from behind a lot. I know that they're going to try to you know, win the game with a good run game and defense, but it's going to be very difficult for Seattle to be on the plus side of things for a better part of the season. So I'm still a little hesitant. I don't like where he's being taken in terms of value for him. If he's there, you know, 2 rounds after, you know, he's getting taken right now, then yeah, absolutely, that's worth it to me. But with where he's going and with what I think this offense is going to be, I'm going to shy away and look for other options that I could likely take and what I would feel a little more comfortable taking. So it's nothing against him as a player. It's everything against the team that he's playing on and the offense that I think it's going to be for him. And I just don't see that being something I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that one, but I think that I think Kevin's right on this one. I think that at the end of the season, he ultimately gets more touches. I've kind of got him projected out there between about 200 and 250 total opportunities, whether it's through passing work, whether it's through the the groundwork. Like I see him somewhere in that range between 200 and 250 total opportunities for him as far as trying to make a play. Now, that being the case, right? Like I would also pay up for him and go into a 5th round. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not saying that I would take both of these guys, one in the 5th, one in the 7th. I'm not going to do that. To pair these two on my roster, I would take one or the other on that one, and I'd be okay with it, with that being the case there. But I do think that you're going to see Seattle really just ground and pound, try and control the clock, and really try and do that one, because as we all know, the quarterback play, whether it's Drew Lock that plays there, is not a very great option. And we saw what that Seattle offense last year looked like under Geno Smith, which, had a lot of opportunity there. So I think that they are going to do everything they can to lean on the run game and try and push that thing through. And it's not going to surprise me to see, 500 plus total carries out of this Seattle backfield when it comes next year. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one. I'm in on Kenneth Walker as far as that kind of 5th round value goes.
So dynasty wise, right? We kind of touched on the redraft and how we're thinking about this. Dynasty rookie drafts. Would you rather have Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker?
I'm probably going to take Breece Hall at that point. I think he's got less competition this year on that one. Kenneth Walker, I think long-term has probably some decent value, but that's one of those that entire situation is just muddled enough for me that it scooches me into, if I've got the option of Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker, I'm going to go with Breece Hall.
Yeah, I mean, I was already in this position, so I had the 101 in a rookie draft, and I took Breece Hall. So I just feel like that's a better situation overall. And while I agree with what Derek is saying there, maybe long term Kenneth Walker, but in the immediate, it's Breece Hall.
Okay, I'll take the contrarian approach. I would rather have Kenneth Walker. I think that the Jets trust Zach Wilson a little bit more. I think that Michael Carter's probably going to eat into more of this running game than maybe what we are thinking at first glance. I think Breece Hall is probably going to lead that team in touches, but overall, I think that Kenneth Walker and his breakaway speed, especially in that division, will benefit him a bit more. I think they're extremely close. I have no issues with people taking Breece Hall, and really, for all intents and purposes, most people are taking him over Kenneth Walker. I know I'm in a very small camp of people who believe that Walker's the right choice there, but whether it's this season or forward, I think I'm gambling on Walker here. I think that we have seen a pretty good track record of Big Ten running backs coming in and serving well in the NFL. Not always as dominant start to finish, but I think their career paths overall lately, they've served themselves very well coming out of that conference and the style of play that they're used to. The weather situation that they play in East Lansing is honestly quite similar to Seattle. It's cold, it's dreary, it's ice type football in December, right? We've seen those games where the snow's just been covering the fields on both sides. So it's my hunch. I'm taking Walker, and we can reevaluate here in about 3 years once we have a lot of footage on both of them.
Yeah, I like it. All righty, let's go ahead and head over to Chris Carson. Chris Carson finished running back 78 last year, 54 rush attempts, 232 yards, 3 touchdowns, 6 receptions on 6 targets for 29 yards. Thoughts on Chris Carson?
Coming off of neck surgery, I am very, very weary and would hope to have the latest information possible before going into my draft, before I select him. I see he's going 43, running back 43 overall, if that's what you're seeing as well, which, I mean, at that point, you're that far down in draft order. That might even still be a little bit high, actually, now that I think about it. 152 overall, 153 overall.
Yeah, something in there.
Yeah, that's that is buyer beware if you're going to go with Chris Carson. It's neck surgery. It's not like, a broken arm or anything. Peyton Manning was gone for an entire year with neck surgery. I don't know that it's the same thing or not, but buyer beware.
I completely agree with that. It is a buyer beware situation. I will add in that Pete Carroll just seems to really like Chris Carson. Like, there is something about Chris Carson that Pete Carroll latches to, and he wants him to be healthy. He wants him to kind of be the 1A, right? And maybe it is still an RBBC, like we've said, but if all things were equal and Pete Carroll could pick, he would want to trot Chris Carson out to start those series and be kind of that 2-down thumper, and then worry about a Penny or a Walker coming in on some passing down work and being able to use that speed elsewhere. But with the neck injury, if you were doing any type of a dynasty startup today, I would say stay away from Chris Carson. Like, the risk just is too high, and I don't see how I don't see how the reward can outweigh the risk. And in redraft leagues, I'm just looking at other options. Like, I like Kenneth Walker. I've made that abundantly clear, but I'm not reaching for a Chris Carson in hopes that he returns to his form of 2 years ago, really, where he finished RB8 and was really a good second or third running back on your team to kind of help propel you into the playoffs. I think that's fool's gold to be rushing in and hoping for that same result. So I'm staying away from Chris Carson, really, regardless of how he performs through the preseason, because it only takes one bad hit for a running back who embraces contact for this injury to become extremely permanent and very, very scary quickly.
Yeah, I'm just going to say very simply, I'm out on Chris Carson on this one. Pete Carroll, who's normally very optimistic about, injuries and getting guys back, things like that. Some of the last reports that I saw were that he didn't necessarily seem his optimistic self when reporting that one back in March. So who knows what has happened in the couple of months since those reports came out. I do know that Chris Carson has missed OTAs out there, obviously with what's going on there. So I am just going to be out on Chris Carson this year, and I'll let those chips fall where they might. DK Metcalf finished wide receiver 12 last year, 75 receptions, 129 targets, 967 yards, 12 touchdowns, 27.27 target share. Thoughts on DK Metcalf?
I'm selling Metcalf. I don't want any part of him. I don't trust the quarterback situation. He had one game where he kind of flashed with Geno Smith. Like, we've seen what Drew Lock has done with Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, and it's not worth the price tag that it takes to draft DK Metcalf. So at this current moment and how things are set up, DK Metcalf, while talented as hell, is in a situation where I cannot trust the guy throwing him the football, and to be able to have him as probably your second wide receiver on a team now, the way that you're drafting, I just feel like there's not enough reward for the risk of taking this guy in the third or fourth round and being able to justify building your wide receiver core of your fantasy team around him.
Yeah, so you'll remember famously on this podcast, I compared DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, where I thought, Tyler Lockett was actually the better of the two options. I don't trust the quarterback. I don't trust the quarterback at all in Seattle. It took Russell Wilson, a Russell Wilson type player to make DK Metcalf, into the player that he is. And it's a position completely dependent upon the quarterback. So when you don't trust the quarterback, it's hard to overcome that. Look at examples that we have with an Allen Robinson, or who was another receiver that, the quarterback changed and it didn't work.
But Robinson at least built up the faith, right? Because he did it with Bortles. He did it with some poor quarterbacks. We haven't seen a quarterback target in on him like a true number one. Right? If he was with Aaron Rodgers, he would be the number one receiver taken off the board.
Absolutely.
I have no doubt about that. He would go over Cooper Kupp because teams would just like the idea of Aaron Rodgers throwing to a big body DK Metcalf. But there's just no track record there.
Right.
Yeah. I guess I say all that to say this. I'm also out on DK Metcalf. I'm not looking at him. There's plenty of talented wide receivers in this league, and there's plenty of really good receivers that have better quarterback situations than what DK Metcalf has in Seattle. So I'm not in on DK this year, and I think a lot of people are going to be very disappointed because he's going like receiver 15. And
he's coming off in the 3rd or 4th round in most drafts.
Yeah, and I just don't see. Do you guys think he finishes even in high-end wide receiver 2 territory?
No, I think he's going to be kind of in that fringe wide receiver 2 territory. To
Exactly.
Be honest with you. Somewhere between 22 and 26, I think, right now. I haven't dove into full projections, but somewhere in there.
But your return on investment, if you're taking him, as the 15th wide receiver off the board, you're just not going to get that return on investment. So that's, again, I think we can say that kind of with everybody. I know that's a phrase that we used already, but I think every single player on this Seattle team is a buyer beware situation because you just don't know with what they're doing at quarterback and how they plan on operating this offense. There are so many unknowns.
Right. And you look at the fact too, right? Seattle in the past has thrown the ball more than I think Pete Carroll necessarily wants to throw the ball because of they had Russell Wilson behind center and they were willing to let him air it out and do Russell Wilson type things. They no longer have him there. We've seen the Drew Lock experience firsthand. We saw what Geno Smith and that offense looked like last year when Russ missed games. And I don't know that we're going to see Seattle keep throwing the ball as much as they've done in the past. And so last year, right, like just to kind of put this in perspective, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about Darnell Mooney, who had 28% of the target share and was seeing 150 target type of range there, right? DK Metcalf last year saw 27% of the target share and didn't crack 130 targets. So again, I think that this pie ends up shrinking more so on this one to the point where Seattle throws the ball less. They probably increase their run ratio, decrease their pass ratio, make this where it's almost a 50-50 split run to pass ratio on this one. And even if he keeps that same type of target share, I don't know that you're going to see DK Metcalf really rise above about 120 targets on this one. And I don't want a guy that I'm going to have to draft with the 3rd round capital wide receiver 15 that's only going to get me around about 120 targets, I think, as the ceiling on this one. I don't see a way to return value unless he's consistently taking those things to the house. You look at the fact that he had 12 touchdowns last year, which really is what brought him up into wide receiver 1 territory. I see him regressing towards the mean on this one as well, and him probably going back down to maybe 6-7 touchdowns when it's all said and done. So I think it's very realistically you see an outcome of somewhere around wide receiver 22 to 26 on this one. Let's go ahead and head over to Tyler Lockett. So Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 13 last year, 73 receptions, 107 targets, 1,175 yards, 8 touchdowns, 22.6% target share. Thoughts on Tyler Lockett?
I know this is Alex's boy, so I'm not going to take
He's not, though. He's not. That whole rant was based on hate of DK Metcalf, really. Like it wasn't pro Tyler Lockett by any means.
Same type of situation, right? As DK, didn't crack 110 targets. The 73 receptions, it's a decent catch rate there. I think the 8 touchdowns help, but I think there's some regression coming in that one also because of your quarterback play. So another guy, if I'm going to take a chance on a Seattle wide receiver, it would most likely be Lockett because the value is there, much like what we were talking about with Penny and Walker earlier.
Right.
You can get Tyler Lockett at basically 40 picks later. So
yeah, I mean, you're talking 87, 88 off the board, somewhere in there. So easily 8th round.
Yeah, so you're at least getting a 4-round discount on a guy who could presumably have similar statistics to DK Metcalf. So again, it's nothing that I'm running and jumping to, but if I'm in a pinch, if I feel like this is my position of need, if you will, I would be more inclined to wait and grab Lockett in the 8th than I would be to pay up and get DK in the 3rd or 4th.
I would co-sign on that. If he's there in the 8th and it's, slim pickings and you're in need of a wide receiver, that's when you go for Tyler Lockett. Otherwise, steer clear.
Yeah, I don't really have anything other to add than that, other than the fact that the great value for Tyler Lockett for fantasy football was his relationship with Russell Wilson. You look back to several years, a couple of years ago, he led the league in red zone targets. It was because when they got down in there, that's where Russell Wilson looked for him. As well as the fact that Tyler Lockett did an exceptional job catching the deep ball. There's not many quarterbacks out there that throw the ball as well on a deep shot as Russell Wilson. So that one's not going to help him out either. And I see a big regression happening here for Tyler Lockett, where we see him probably in a very solid wide receiver 3 type of finish this year. And I'm just going to kind of be out on that for the most part, right? It really kind of depends on the 8th round. If I'm putting him on there as my 4th or 5th option there, I potentially might do it, but you think back to the fact that when we've drafted Tyler Lockett, when we've gone through that route in the past, it was one of those, you always had to play the game. Is this a Lockett week? Is this a DK week? Is this a Lockett week? Is this a DK week? Because typically you never saw those two both put up wide receiver 1 finishes on the week together. They typically kind of alternated, or they had a stretch in there, and Tyler Lockett was very much a boom bust type of play. And I think a lot of the boom is gone with the departure of Russell Wilson. Before we head on over into the tight ends, we got a couple of comments here coming in. So let's hit these ones up here real quick. And Little Boxes on Twitch is saying the RBs for Seattle are only the only ones worth taking. Carroll loves to run the ball, and you can get them at a pretty low ADP. Might not be RB1s, but they are low-end RB2s, high-end 3s. Deep leagues will utilize them. That is what we said there. Absolutely, Little Boxes. Thanks for tuning in. And Green Screen Media over on YouTube saying DK Metcalf was wide receiver 4 with Geno at QB. Love his value this year. Yeah, he did have a couple of weeks there, but he also had a couple of weeks where DK Metcalf was also just not very good with Geno at quarterback. You look at week 10, wide receiver 55, week 11, wide receiver 55. Like there was a lot of issues with that one there as well. So he could propose some good value, but I'm just going to be out on him. Alrighty, let's go ahead and head on over to the tight end room. Noah Fant, tight end number 12, coming over from the Broncos in the offseasons. 67 receptions, 88 targets, 654 yards, 4 touchdowns, 17.4% target share. Thoughts on Noah Fant?
So this is the one dude that I'm actually like if I was forced to have, if there was some league that I was in, they were like, you have to have a piece of the Seattle offense on your roster. This is the one dude that I would target. Like, this is the one guy, because I still think, as a tight end, he's big bodied. He can catch. Obviously we saw what he was able to do in Denver on pretty bad teams. He still was able to get his, I shouldn't say bad teams, bad offenses. And he was the one guy that was still consistent. So for me, like, obviously he's not one of the top, in the top tier of tight ends. And he may not even be in that second tier of tight ends, given what his quarterback situation is. But with where he's going, I have to double check. I just lost that. I pulled it up. 133 overall in the 130s. With where he's going, probably you've already had the tight end runs happen. He's not a bad option if you've waited that long to go tight end. If you're not going to go early on tight end, if you're not going to go, and grab one of those top tier guys right away, I still think Noah Fant is an option. And granted, I know we've been railing on the fact that they don't have a quarterback, but even with, whoever it is at quarterback, if you have a good pass catching tight end, odds are they're going to find him because they're going to be under duress so often that they just need to get the ball to a security blanket. And what better security blanket than Noah Fant? So I think, he causes matchup nightmares. He should be effective in the red zone. I say should be because he hasn't always been, but I actually don't mind Noah Fant. If I have to get a piece of Seattle's offense, that's the piece that I'm going for.
I can subscribe to that. If you're waiting on tight end and if you're going for kind of that, really the kind of that fourth run of tight end, right? You have your top guys, then you have your TJ Hawkinsons of the world, which is kind of that second tier of tight end, and then float on through. I can subscribe to that. If you're going to be streaming tight ends anyway, Noah Fant's at least the most athletic guy that you can find in that range. Maybe kind of in that same gear as Evan Ingram, right? And I think Evan Ingram's actually going later. But it's that same athletic skill set. He doesn't block extremely well. Like that was part of the problem. He missed a couple big blocks last season with Denver and got particularly Melvin Gordon smoked on a couple plays. So he is definitely more of a receiving option than a blocking option. So that's a good thing. If when you're drafting tight ends, you want them out in route. There is at least some natural chemistry with Fant and Drew Lock because they played together in Denver. And I think Geno has enough veteran experience that it'll probably keep him from forcing the ball down the field into bad situations, right? If you're going to run the ball, get to third and short, then you're looking for your big-bodied guys, right? You're looking for DK Metcalf on a slant, and maybe you throw Noah Fant underneath him on a quick out, right? Those rub routes where you're trying to get the cornerbacks and linebackers confused a little bit to pick up those 4 or 5 yards for a first down. So, I'm okay with this. I can subscribe to that and understand why people are going to go there. I wouldn't be surprised if when I get done with my redraft leagues that I have a share or two of Noah Fant just to kind of spread it out a little bit. But I'm also looking at a couple different areas. Like I still like Irv Smith Jr. for Minnesota. Like he's been hurt. Like he's been kind of banged up. I should been banged up, but he's a guy that came into the league with a lot of hype coming into the league out of Alabama. Have yet to see what he's truly able to do, but he's a guy I'd be willing to take a flyer on in this same area or tier of tight end. Again, Evan Ingram playing down in Jacksonville, thinking that they're just going to kind of huck it all the way around the yard with Trevor Lawrence again this year. Another option there, but I would have no problem having a couple shares of Noah Fant just to see if we can catch lightning in a bottle and maybe he's able to get 4 or 5 touchdowns this year and kind of help propel you on those weeks where you need help.
Right. I like that one as well, right? Kind of that big body safety blanket that they can utilize very well there. And Noah Fant is kind of that definition of what you've looked for in the past as far as the late tight end type of strategy there. You're a guy that you can pick up in the 11th, 12th, 13th round, kind of in that range there, and can, get some decent target share, get some decent touchdowns there as well. And I think he gives you a little bit more so than just tight end or touchdown dependent type of tight end that you typically see as a late round tight end type of play there. So I like him. And it's one of those that I may be looking for him down there as well in the later rounds there too.
As I'm going through this, I don't know that he sees a huge drop in production from what we saw last year where he finished tight end 12.
Right.
I mean, 88 targets, I think is well within the possibilities. I think we're probably looking closer to 75 or 80, but 88 is definitely possible. 4 touchdowns isn't out of, again, the realm of possibilities. And if Pete Carroll's able to unlock some things that maybe the Broncos coaching staff couldn't, which is extremely possible because the Broncos coaching staff under Vic Fangio was not very good, we might see more than his 9.7 yards per catch, right? We might be able to see that extend a little bit and get up towards 10.5, 11 yards per catch, which losing a couple receptions is fine. If your yards per catch go up, you make up for that difference. So if he's coming off the board and you can get him, what'd you say, Alex? He was the tight end, what, off the board?
I saw 15. So
it's about true value. Maybe there's a little bit of room for improvement there. So I think that all speaks to what we're saying, right? It's worth a flyer if you're waiting on tight end.
Right. If nothing else, you're drafting him at his floors because I don't think he finishes much below that either. So I like it. Let's go ahead and head to the quarterback room. Geno Smith is the finished QB 41, 65 completions, 95 attempts, a 68.4% completion percentage, 702 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, 9 rushes for 42 yards, 1 touchdown on the ground. Thoughts on Geno Smith?
It's you like the completion percentage, but if you, Derek, pop that slide back up for us here real quick, if you don't mind. It's the 65 completions and the 702 yards, right? So he's not, his air yards is extremely limited, limited. So again, that does feed in well for a Noah Fant type. It does not feed that well in towards a Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, though. Like, I know he had a couple weeks where we force-fed DK the ball. Weeks, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and he had 4 of Geno's 5 touchdowns that he threw. But I just don't think that that's sustainable, through the course of a season. Right now, he seems to be the leader in the clubhouse to be the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. There's a lot of time between now and kind of the start of the season here, the first week of September, so things could change. But Geno he's maybe your third quarterback in a super flex league. I mean, you're not drafting him in a single QB league, and you're not going to be too happy with yourself if he's your second quarterback in a super flex. So you're grabbing him for bye weeks, you're grabbing him for injuries, you're grabbing him for maybe he catches a heater, and you're trying to just play the matchup because it just looks too good to pass up. But he is not a guy that I'm actively seeking and expecting to be fantasy relevant week in and week out.
Yeah, he's definitely not an option in a single QB league. Neither of the guys are. And truth be told, yeah, you're gonna be very upset with yourself if he's your second option in a super flex. So I'll just keep this short and sweet. I'm not buying Geno Smith. The only way, he is a break glass in case of emergency type for me.
Yeah. Geno Smith to me is, if you're drafting him, you pizzaed when you should have French fried, and you're going to have a bad time. Like that's as simple as I can put it. Like you blinked and you blinked wrong when you got on the clock there. So Geno Smith is a guy that I will not have on any of my rosters if I can unless I can absolutely not help it. Like zero chance I'm going that route. Let's head over to the other guy, Drew Lock, 67 completions, 111 attempts, 63.2% completion percentage, 625 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 6 rushes for 18 yards. Thoughts on Drew Lock?
How do you throw 2 touchdowns on, 67 completions?
Yes.
How is that how is that possible in today's NFL?
He kept running them in against Kansas City.
That's true. But that's almost like the funniest. I mean, that's almost harder to do than to throw, 50 touchdowns in a season. Like that is damn near impossible. Same song, second verse here. Break glass in case of emergency.
Yeah, I'm not partaking. Pass. Like, there's no reason I'm taking Drew Lock whatsoever. I would rather start a tight end in my super flex than Drew Lock because I feel like I could get more consistency out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Drew Lock is you French fried when you should have pizzaed and you're going to have a bad time. All right. Moving on to the Washington Commanders. Their third name in as many seasons, it seems. But the Washington Commanders finished at 7-10 last year, 54% pass, 46% run ratio. They were 23rd in total points for, 21st in total yards for. Head coach Ron Rivera and Scott Turner is the offensive coordinator. We'll go ahead and head directly into the running back room here. Antonio Gibson finished running back 10 last year, 258 rush attempts, 1,037 yards, 7 touchdowns, 42 receptions, 52 targets, 294 yards, and 3 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Antonio Gibson?
This was the most lackluster top 10 running back finish I have seen in a really long time.
Yes.
On our show, we kept talking about when are we going to see Gibson? Like, when are they going to let him do, Antonio Gibson type things? And he was fighting with, was it a ankle or a heel issue?
Yeah, it's something. I do remember.
For part of last season. Yeah. It just never quite came together. Like, he was just consistent enough to kind of get this this RB 10 total finish, but he wasn't the sexy pick that we all thought he could have been. Derek, I know you in particular really liked what you saw and what you were thinking for Antonio Gibson, right? They were talking Christian McCaffrey-esque, right? And so we were thinking tons of receptions and PPR gold, and it really turned into PP in the potty, and we just wanted to flush him by the time the season was done with. So, I'm not new quarterback. You have Carson Wentz. It does kind of change the dynamic from a Taylor Heineke and what this offense can do. I think that Wentz will probably lead towards maybe a few cleaner opportunities for Antonio Gibson, but I'm going to have to think really long and hard if I'm going to be drafting Gibson this year, guys. Like, there's just so many other options. Like, depending when we start drafting, and because we draft really close to the start of the season in our home league, right? But if we keep hearing good things out of J.K. Dobbins, just for instance, even though we know J.K. Dobbins is probably going to have more of a timeshare on his team than what Gibson might have here with the Commanders, I think I might still go with a run-heavy Baltimore team, right? And go that route. It's really hard for me to swallow taking Gibson as a top 12 running back when I'm not sold on what the identity of this Washington team is and how it's all going to play out with a defensive-minded head coach, a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator, and a defense that should be coming back for revenge after they underperformed last year. But it doesn't feel right, if that makes sense, right? It just doesn't sit well having to take Gibson in the third round in most of these drafts when I think I can get more value somewhere else.
So let me ask you a question. We'll throw this one out here as a keep, trade, cut here, right? You got to keep one, trade one, cut one. Saquon, Gibby, or Cam Akers. Keep, trade, cut on those three.
You're not going to get any value for Saquon, so
I'm cutting Saquon.
Yeah, you have to cut Saquon. You can probably still get some value off of Gibson, and I would keep Cam Akers.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. The Achilles injury still scares me a little bit with Akers, to the fact where I think I would try and trade Akers and keep Gibson, only because it's the devil, While Gibson was banged up, he did his best to play through those injuries last year. Like, he only had 2 weeks one week where he didn't play. The other week was his bye week. So he did what he could to fight through with those injuries. He was better the second half of the season, which really kind of propelled him to this top 10 finish. So I think I'm drafting Gibson over both of those guys.
Okay. And the injury that he had last year, the major one, was a stress fracture in his shin.
There we go.
And that's and kind of once that healed up, during the first half of the season, once that kind of healed up, then you saw him kind of go a little bit more gangbusters there in the second half of the season when that injury kind of healed up there. But
so here's if Washington is smart, what they will do is make sure that Carson Wentz doesn't have to throw the ball more than 25 times in a game. I understand that that's not how the NFL works. Usually, if your quarterback is throwing it, fewer than 25 times, that means you have a ridiculously comfortable lead. He's probably already thrown 3 touchdowns and 300 yards on like 3 super long plays. But running the football is how, like, Carson Wentz plays in you need to have a solid run game in order to be successful with Carson Wentz as your quarterback. So I think that the running backs in Washington do have some value, whether or not they actually stick to, what I know at least about, Carson Wentz. That would be, I'm sure they know about it too. But I think that if they can run the football effectively and not have to rely on Carson Wentz's right arm, then they will have success in a division that seemingly nobody ever wants to win when it comes down to it. So I kind of like Gibson here. I know that Kevin just got done saying that maybe not. I think in the third round, Gibson, if you're getting him in the third round and he can finish, either at that low end RB1, high end RB2, even though it wasn't, spectacular, it was consistent, and that's what you're looking for in terms of, a running back. Now, he's not going to be the first running back I'd take, but as my second running back, not a bad option, because I think that's where he finishes is right up there at the top of running back 2, or at the low end of that running back 1 if Washington stays to what they should. So I would take a really hard look at Antonio Gibson, especially if he's my second option. I know, where he's going in that 23, 24 range, puts him there in that third round. I don't think that's a bad return on investment.
Right. Yeah, I don't see any issue with drafting Antonio Gibson in the third. And for the most part, right, like depending upon the league, of course, that's either my second running back or my third running back. If I'm playing single QB, that's my third running back that I'm putting on my roster there. And so him in my flex spot, yep, sign me up for that one. I'm in all day long. In a super flex, him as my RB2, I still like that one. I do think that he's going to get between about 200 and 250 opportunities on this one. It'll be interesting to see how JD McKissic is kind of utilized in this offense going forward, but you definitely saw the hands come to play last year with Antonio Gibson there. And I think that that route will continue there. And Carson Wentz has a tendency to check down a little bit to those running backs there as well. So I could see that one playing out very well for him as well. And where he's kind of coming off the board right now, I've seen him kind of coming off the board at RB16. I think he'll return better value than that on our RB16. So I'm in on Antonio Gibson. It's going to be hard to get me off of him. I'm not going to lie. Like that's one of those almost my dudes at this point. So, all righty, let's go ahead and head on over to JD McKissic, running back 43 last year, 48 rush attempts, 202 yards, 2 touchdowns, 43 receptions, 53 targets, 397 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on JD McKissic?
So McKissic had almost identical receptions and targets as Gibson did, but he came away with an extra 85 yards off of that. So, hell, I don't know. If all things are created equal, McKissic's not a guy I'm looking for. Like, he just doesn't fill that for me. Like, everyone's already forgetting about Cordero Patterson again. Like, between the two, I'd rather have Patterson. And it's not complete apples to apples, but just something like that. Or if we're getting that late in the draft, like, I think I'd rather take a chance on a maybe an unproven wide receiver who started to trend up towards the tail end of last year. And I think they're going to see a bigger opportunity share coming into this season. Like, I don't feel that I have to draft JD McKissic in any format, really, for any reason. He's not a true handcuff. He doesn't truly have standalone value unless you're in like crazy deep leagues. So for most formats, I'm out. Like, I'm not even in on him in like a best ball league. Like, he doesn't provide those splashes of huge upside weeks where you could draft him super late and get your value because he kind of wins a week for you. Like, he's not that type of guy either. So I don't see a reason to draft him. Therefore, I'm out. I will look for other options.
Here is all you need to know about JD McKissic. There are a couple different, ADP sites out there, right? And he's going anywhere as the 135 all the way to the 153. Or he's going running back 41 or running back 51. That's all you need to know about JD McKissic, is that nobody really knows, right? Like, it's just nobody really knows. There's really no great idea about what JD McKissic is. And so I think when you don't know, when there's that much discrepancy in what everybody in the industry is thinking about him, like that to me is giant red flag, right? Like, it is a giant red flag. There are a lot of smart people that contribute to these, to these sites that put together ADPs and that put together, these are drafts that are happening. And obviously the people that are drafting now know their stuff, because otherwise they wouldn't be participating in in a draft this early on. So that's all you need to know about JD McKissic. Kevin, you're right. He doesn't really have handcuff value, because I don't think that there's going to be a true number one running back there in Washington. I think that they're going to mix in, some McKissic. They're going to mix in some Gibson. They're going to mix in, some Robinson as well. We'll talk about him too. But I just think that that's where, when you don't have standalone value and you don't have handcuff value, what value do you have? And to me, that's the question you have to wrestle with when you're looking down at, your draft board and you see, okay, do I take McKissic here or do I not? And I more often than not, depending on what else is out there, I'm going to explore what else is out there versus JD McKissic.
Yep. I'll just make this short, sweet, and to the point. I'm out on JD McKissic and not looking to add him on any format that I'm playing in. Let's go ahead and head on over to Brian Robinson. So Brian Robinson was drafted in the third round, the 98th pick from Alabama. Thoughts on Brian Robinson?
I think he's going to end up stealing a little bit of goal line work from Gibson here through the course of the season. He's a guy who he's an older running back, but he doesn't have a whole lot of usage, right? Because he was sitting behind so many of these great Alabama running backs that he did well when he finally got his opportunity, but he's still a tier below, right? He still runs pretty upright. Like, he's pretty easy to tackle. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He blocks well, which will get him playing time, right? Like, he is a good blocking running back. So I think if that can translate to the NFL, that will earn him opportunities in passing down situations where they want to go four wide and want that running back in to be able to pick up the linebacker. But that being said, I'm not actively going after him in a redraft league. I will take a flyer on him in the third round of a rookie draft just to kind of see what happens in a couple different leagues. But I'm not actively seeking this guy out in a redraft. So I would advise everyone, look for a different option. Look for someone who has a more immediate path to timeshare. Gus Edwards. I'd rather have Gus Edwards than Brian Robinson, because Gus, as late as he's going in drafts, he's still going to see opportunities in Baltimore.
I would agree with that. I think it's what you know versus what you don't know. We're not really sure how they plan on utilizing him. He is, to Kevin's point, older, a little more mature, played in a pro-style offense at Alabama, understands, big-time football, obviously, because nothing's really bigger than that. So I would say he's worth a flyer in a rookie draft, in a redraft, especially in leagues that aren't very deep. He's a guy you pay attention to after the first couple weeks to see how they're utilizing him. And then beyond that, he's a pay attention to guy, but not a must have.
Yeah, so right now where you look at him, he's coming off the board in about the 15th round, which for the most part is either undrafted or the very last round of most redraft leagues out there, like that kind of range. The only reason that I'd be looking at him would be if I drafted Antonio Gibson there, because Brian Robinson would be the replacement for he would be the handcuff for the groundwork on that one should Antonio miss any time there. And that was one of those that we did bring up a couple of concerns over some of his injury history in the past here with both the turf toe previously and the stress fracture in the shin, having missed time for injuries each of the last 2 seasons. So that's where Brian Robinson, I think, has some value for fantasy. And that's where any relevance that he have will be is if Gibby misses some time down the stretch for any reason due to some injury, something like that. So worth keeping a watch on, but I'm not, only reason I'm taking in the last round of my redraft league is because I already have Gibson there and I'm drafting a handcuff type of thing. If not, I'm putting keeping him on a watch list and just watching what Antonio Gibson's doing as well there. All right, let's go ahead and head over to the wide receiver room. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 25, 77 receptions, 130 targets, 1,053 yards, 5 touchdowns, 24.34% target share. Thoughts on Terry McLaurin?
I think that's pretty much who Terry McLaurin is. I think you might see him sneak up into like wide receiver 20 territory, but I don't see him taking that leap into top 12 territory. Like he is a middle to lower end wide receiver 2 until he has a truly dynamic quarterback throwing him the football. So a lot of cases, I think this year, from what I'm starting to see, people are finally starting to kind of get on board with this as his draft value starts to slip a little bit. What league? Derek, you and I were doing a league, and I ended up picking him up as my second wide receiver. And I remember you texted me, you go, dude, I didn't see you going there. It's like,
right.
I want a piece of him. Like, I'm not saying he's undraftable, but I want him at the right price. In that instance, I felt like I got him at the right price for the value that he's going to return to me. Obviously, he's built differently than Michael Pittman from the Colts. Sorry. But we did see that, again, Michael Pittman was a very serviceable running back or wide receiver and finished in wide receiver 2 territory. He got the touchdowns to go with it, and Carson Wentz can support that. So I don't think that the floor is much below wide receiver 25, 24, right? You're still floating at the bottom end of wide receiver 2. So you got to be careful with that a little bit, but I don't see him falling off a map, but I don't see his ceiling being much higher than wide receiver 20, maybe just a touch higher. So I like the guy, but I like him at my price. Like I'm not going to reach for him. He's not going to be the 15th receiver taken off the board to me. I will wait another round and then see if he's still there and then take my shot on him possibly. Like I refuse to reach for a guy where he has yet to live up to his potential.
Yeah, and I that's exactly, you kind of stole my thought process on him there. I think he has value with Carson Wentz now, but I don't think that the value is increasingly different from what it was the year before. I do think they made an upgrade at the quarterback position from Heineke to Wentz, but and I think this team is going to have to figure out other ways to move the football, and it may not always run through Terry McLaurin. So I like the idea of him being, your second or third wide receiver if you can get him as your third wide receiver, like that's a pretty good deal. Presuming that you've already gotten, a couple of running backs as well. So if he's there in the fourth or fifth, which I'm not sure that, that's plausible. But then that's if he's there in the fourth or fifth, I think it's absolutely a yes and move on. But beyond that, like to Kevin's point, he's a good value, but it has to be the right value. Otherwise, you're not gonna be very happy with the return.
Right. I mean, this is one of those that, we talk all the time about touchdown dependent tight ends, right? And that's typically where you see that phrase come from more so. And it speaks to the fact that has fantasy relevance, has fantasy value when they score a touchdown. And if they don't score the touchdown, they are hard to play in your fantasy roster. And that's what Terry McLaurin was last year. He was a touchdown dependent wide receiver. In the weeks that he scored a touchdown, he was wide receiver 3 on the week, wide receiver 4 on the week, wide receiver 5 on the week, wide receiver 7 on the week. The next highest finish on any week that he didn't score a touchdown was week 18, where he finished wide receiver 31 on the week. And week 18 doesn't matter because the fantasy football season is over. And if you're still playing in a week 18 championship, my apologies to you. But even looking at week 10 and week 17, wide receiver 35, like fringe wide receiver 3 territory when he doesn't touch a touchdown for last season. And I don't know that much changes on that one, because again, the weeks that he went off and did very, very well were the weeks that he saw a tremendous amount of targets. And the weeks that he doesn't see a tremendous amount of targets, he also didn't do very well. So this is one of those that it is proceed with caution for me with Terry McLaurin. Kevin said it earlier, wide receiver 15 off the board. In that case, that is far too rich for me. I had Terry McLaurin and got to suffer through this boom bust weeks last year in the home league. And it was infuriating because the wide receiver room, you just couldn't get anything consistent and sustainable with the pairing that I had there, which, shame on me for going that route and putting him on my wide receiver 2 last year. But boom bust kind of guy. I don't know that much of that changes this year. While Carson Wentz does throw a good deep ball, I just don't know that you're going to see this offense be opened up enough for him to either volume target his way there or be able to big play his way to fantasy relevance, again, inside wide receiver 2 territory and high end wide receiver 2 territory to return the value on his pick. So I'm most likely out on Terry McLaurin, especially at his ADP now. Alrighty, Curtis Samuel, who finished wide receiver 184 last year, 6 receptions, 9 targets, 27 yards, 1.69% target share, missed most of the season due to injury last year. Thoughts on Curtis Samuel?
Curtis Samuel is the guy that we were pretty high on last year, right? Like we thought he was going to answer the call and kind of be that true number 2 option outside of Terry McLaurin. Didn't end up being that way. That's a new season. Ron Rivera likes Curtis Samuel, right? Like we've seen what Curtis Samuel has been able to do when healthy and playing with a Ron Rivera team. So I do think that there's relevance here, right? Like he is a guy that you can snag as your 5th wide receiver, like and be able to kind of see how things float out for a while. And if it turns out that he's seeing some volume and some target share, he becomes a flex play. If it turns out that Carson Wentz and him just don't have the rapport, then maybe he's a waiver wire casualty, right? You drop him to pick up a more pressing need to fill out your roster. So I'm willing to take the chance on Curtis Samuel. I think a lot of people are out on him, so his value is super low. Your risk is very low. The ceiling is meh to slightly better than meh, if that's a true gauge to be able to gauge that by. So I'm keeping an eye on him in the right places. I draft him, if I can get him super late. But again, I am not forcing the issue if they're only going to have Carson Wentz throw the ball 25 times a game. Like it just doesn't quite fit in that he sees more than, 3, maybe 4 targets a game, maybe a rush attempt, something like that. Like, he has to fall into the end zone to be relevant. He doesn't see the volume for me to take him in a best ball league. So if I'm going to take him, I'm going to take him really, really late. And if I don't like what I see in the first couple of weeks, I'm going to pass. I'm going to go somewhere else, and I'll drop him and pick up the next hot thing on the waiver wire.
Yeah, he's going anywhere. I mean, he's 10th round at the earliest, and more than likely 16, 17, which means, I mean, in a lot of leagues, that's undrafted, right? That's where we're at with that. You're not going to go past 14 or 15 rounds. So if he's undrafted, again, it's another guy that you pay attention to how, things are progressing there in Washington. You pay attention to the reports coming out from the beat writers about how he looks in practice, and how the first couple of weeks go, and you put a pin in it and you hang on to it. But he's a big bodied receiver. And who knows, maybe him and Carson Wentz have something, and maybe him and Carson Wentz have something because teams are concerned that they don't get beat by Terry McLaurin for some reason. So Curtis Samuel all of a sudden becomes, the beneficiary of Terry the decoy. So do I draft him? I tend to lean towards what Kevin's saying here in terms of what he is, what his value is. It's a dart throw. It's maybe he can help you out. And if it's not, with where he's going, really it's not that big of a deal if it doesn't pan out.
Right. And I do like that, right? He's, typically you're going to be able to stag him up with the last pick of the last round of your draft. So I like that value for him because he does have some ceiling to him, and he'll return better value than where you're going to draft him barring injury this year. So I like that one. And it's, again, right, Kevin made the mention that I also like guys at that last deal that I can see what that's going to look like. And if I, am not a fan of what I'm seeing, it's an easy cut and move on type of deal there, instead of trying to hang on to some of these guys where you're thinking that they might be, you took the dart throw for a later in the season type of deal. So I like that one. And with his ADP, wouldn't have any problem taking him with the last pick of my draft there. Jahan Dotson coming over in the draft, drafted in the first round, pick 16 from Penn State. Thoughts on Jahan Dotson?
Again, I just don't feel like there's enough targets to go around here. Like, I feel like he's probably the true number 2 in Washington based off his size and speed, and Curtis Samuel kind of falls into more of that slot role. So there's probably some opportunity there. Honestly, in rookie drafts,
he's been slipping in rookie drafts hard.
More I'm looking at him now, right? Like when he was going at the top of the second round, I was pass, right? Or even a couple drafts right after the NFL draft came out. Like there were people snagging him in the mid to late first round, and I'm saying absolutely pass. But right, wrong, or indifferent, Penn State has had a niche for turning out really good NFL prospects at wide receiver, and I don't know that can be completely ignored. So based off of pedigree, again, in the right situation, he's a guy that I'd be willing to take a flyer on in 1 or 2 redraft leagues, but he is not a guy that I'm like saying I have to go get. So buyer beware, right? There's just not a whole lot of targets that are maybe going around. I don't see the Commanders tossing it all around the yard. You're looking at 25 to 30 passing attempts per game. If, you're averaging a 24% target share for Terry McLaurin, well, then there's 8 targets a game, 8.5 targets a game. You know that you're going to see a couple go to your running backs each game. You're going to see a few go to the tight ends. Curtis Samuel's going to see 3 or 4. Like, we just ate up a whole bunch of targets really quick, right? So Jahan Dotson's going to have to make the most off of like 5 targets a game. It's possible, but again, for a number 2 wide receiver on a team, I think I'd rather take a step back and look like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, because at least he's playing in Kansas City. It's a pass-happy offense, right? Like you're being able to see some opportunity come out of that. So I do think I'd be willing to pivot away from him rather quickly this season and see what this kid's all about, and then worry about him next year in redrafts.
Right. I mean, where he's going at is very nice as far as redraft kind of goes. You're talking with a late pick, 14th, 15th round type of range in there again. But, a guy that's going around that similar type of range is a guy like Tim Patrick. And that would be a guy that I'd be looking at far more than a Jahan Dotson, who, Tim Patrick's, I think, a guy that will drastically outperform his ADP, who right now he's kind of that wide receiver 59. And like we said last week when we were talking with the Broncos, I think, Tim Patrick finishes very securely inside wide receiver 3 territory. So, that's a guy that if I'm looking at wide receiver in a similar type of range there, that's a guy that I'm going to go with over a Jahan Dotson there. So, but I do think that he could potentially swing some good things there. All righty. Logan Thomas, tight end room. Logan Thomas finished tight end 45 last year, 18 receptions, 25 targets, 196 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4.68% target share on an injury shortened season. Thoughts on Logan Thomas?
Man, if he can stay healthy, we've seen what Carson Wentz can do with a tight end. We've seen what he can do with a couple tight ends, and he can really support them and make them, into not top tier, but definitely second tier type guys. We saw it with Zach Ertz. We saw it a little bit with Dallas Goedert. And so I like Logan Thomas. I have a little bit of a soft spot for him because I had him a few seasons and he ended up, screwing me last year. But that was because he got hurt. So if he can stay healthy, he's definitely another one of those guys, like somebody we were talking about, a little earlier, Noah Fant, right? Like that. He's kind of in that same ilk, I think, in terms of touchdown dependent, right? But we'll still get a fair share of looks from the quarterback. So, again, if you have elected to wait on tight end or you're streaming tight end, Logan Thomas is a great option there, I think, for that type of play. Any earlier, I think you'll be disappointed with what you get back. But as if you're going to take tight end late or going to stream tight end and just have him based on matchups, perfect guy to have to at least get the ball rolling on that.
Yeah, I like Logan Thomas for his touchdown upside, right? Like he is a big tight end who has enough speed to get up the seam and kind of do some different things. I was with you guys. I really liked him going into last year. Injury bug kind of snuck up and got him here a little bit. So rethinking, but I completely agree with what you said, Alex. If you're waiting on tight end, he's not a bad tight end to take a shot on, right? Like if you're going to be streaming him anyway, get a guy who has a good rapport. I shouldn't say a good rapport, a good track record of getting open in the red zone, right? And finding ways to score some touchdowns and get down the field. 3 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown. Not that that's a given every single week, but that's a serviceable mark for a tight end, right? We would take that out of anybody not named, Waller, Kittle, Pitts, or Kelsey.
Or Andrews.
Or Andrews, right? But so there's your top. But Hawkinson had a couple of those weeks last year, still finished in the top 10, right? He finished top 7. Sorry. I think he's tied in 7. So it does work out. It's just what you're comfortable with. But overall, I'm very comfortable streaming tight ends. I seem to do it every single year in multiple leagues. So I like the Logan Thomas play.
Yeah. I'm liking Logan Thomas where you can get him tight end 20 coming off the boards right now. Again, you're talking 14, 15 type of round. He's actually going a couple picks after Jahan Dotson right now for redrafts. And that's the guy that I would take over Jahan Dotson there as well. A guy that I think will see more touchdowns and, has the ability to do that. So yeah, I think Logan Thomas will certainly return value on his draft capital for next year. Let's go ahead and head to the quarterback room here. Carson Wentz finished quarterback 14 last year, 322 completions, 516 attempts, 62.4% completion percentage, 3,563 yards through the air, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 57 rushes, 215 yards, and 1 touchdown. Thoughts on Carson Wentz?
Alex, you want to take this? Yes. I know he's your boy.
Well, yes, and I'm not as high on him, obviously, because he's now on his 3rd team. which I didn't think was fathomable back in 2015 when he got drafted, 2016 when he got drafted. He really is literally one game away from being with Indianapolis still. Like that's where we're at. Things didn't work out there in Philly after they won the Super Bowl. You know, the expectations, coaching staff, like they cleaned house after that. When the one guy they should have fired in Philly still employed there at the GM spot. Anyways, he is literally one game away from still being in Indianapolis. So to think that like, oh, Carson Wentz has fallen off, he's on his third team in his 6 years in the league, it's kind of unfair. There were circumstances out of his control. And yes, the game that they needed to win last year to get into the playoffs, they didn't do. And there was high expectations at A&D because of what that roster looked like. And they thought that adding Carson Wentz would be, the next piece that they needed. So I understand why they moved off of him. I still think he didn't get a fair shake, but that's the way that the world works. So he's going anywhere, guys, is like quarterback 24 or 25. Mm-hmm. He's not going to finish quarterback 24 or 25. Like that's not where he's going to go. So if you're in a league and you can wait on Carson Wentz as quarterback 24, 25, like obviously, I don't think in single quarterback leagues he's going to be one of your dudes. But in a super flex, if you're getting him at quarterback 24, 25, he is going to finish in the top 15. That's 10 spots better than, where he's going. So I don't understand. I understand why people are fading him. I get that, but you still know what you're going to get out of him. And that's a top 15 finish more than likely. Obviously he kept the interceptions down last year and the touchdowns were up. He's got options to throw to. He's got, decent running backs that the offense can lean on. So while he may not be asked to do a ton, he's still going to have quality stats. And throughout the course of the season, I don't think Carson Wentz is ever going to win you a week, but I certainly don't think he's ever going to lose you a week because he puts up a dud.
I think he could put up a dud, but that is what it is. It's a second quarterback, right? He's a guy that if you're waiting a little bit on quarterback and if you're slow to draft a second quarterback in a super flex league, like he's not a terrible option, especially with where he's going. Like there is some upside there. There's some value built in. He does have offensive pieces around him to help make him I say relevant, but serviceable, right? To start in that second quarterback spot. Is he the guy that I'm gunning after for my second quarterback? No, not at all. But I do think there's potential there. You will see a couple weeks where he finishes inside of QB1, but then you're going to see a couple weeks where he finishes. I think you will see a couple weeks where he finishes outside of quarterback 2. Like, I do think you will see a couple of those stinkers. That division just is weird. Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded head coach. So if they find a way to get up early, you could see a game where he's only throwing the ball 15 to 20 times. Like, that's not his fault, but game script will then tell you he's not going to play or he's not going to be that high up on the rankings list. So I think somewhere around QB 16 to 18 is probably a realistic range for Carson Wentz. So again, built-in value, but I think his floor is probably QB 23, 24 as well.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the range on him as well. And really when you look at it, he put up that QB 14 overall finish last year over the course of about 5 weeks, from weeks 5 through 9, where the first those 5 weeks there kind of put him as quarterback 10 through the first half of the season, and then just kind of fell apart going down the stretch where he finished quarterback 21 through the second half of the season there. And I don't know that's going to necessarily change much here, where you're going to get some of that fluctuation. You're going to have some of those boom bust types of weeks there. And, Carson Wentz, I think, will return value on where he's going at currently from an ADP standpoint. But I think that you're right. I don't think that it's as drastic of as an improvement, going from like a 25 to a 14 or something like that. I think that it's more realistic that you see him coming off the board at QB 25 and probably finishing somewhere around QB 20 when it's all said and done here. So that's kind of where I'm seeing him return some value.
Hold on.
But we'll be all right.
Okay, so let's play the game. Which quarterback would you rather have? Carson Wentz or Tua?
Tua.
Okay. This game isn't going the way I thought it would. Carson Wentz or Kirk Cousins?
Kirk Cousins. Easily Kirk Cousins.
Absolutely Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, Kirk Cousins. He's a fantasy darling, isn't he? Okay. Tannehill or Carson Wentz?
That one's actually a tough one there. But I think I'd probably still lean Tannehill.
I think I'd lean. I think that might be my tipping point.
Like that's right at the level there, right? Like the other ones that I could think that would be in that same range would be a lot of rookies from last year, right? Like Carson Wentz or Zach Wilson, Carson Wentz or Mac Jones, Carson Wentz or Daniel Jones.
So those are guys that are going all around him. Trevor Lawrence. So that's 21 through 25 basically is Trevor Lawrence, Tannehill, Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, Carson Wentz. Like that's where we're at with where those guys are kind of slotting in there. But there's a 30 pick difference, on some of these aggregation sites. There's 30 pick difference overall between a Tannehill and a Carson Wentz.
That's a single QB league though too, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're taking single QB league, like that's you're drafting backup smash glass in case of emergency type of deal there, right? Like even if we're talking super flex, I think I would rather trot Ryan Tannehill out there week in, week out than I think I would Carson Wentz for a super flex deal. Like we've seen what Ryan Tannehill's been able to do, and he's done it more recently than what we've seen Carson Wentz do it.
Okay, so I still have a Carson Wentz bias. That's all that game confirmed. Go ahead.
Okay. All righty. Any other thoughts here on the Commanders? All righty. Let's go ahead and head on over into the Baltimore Ravens, who finished 8-9 last year, 54% pass, 46% run. They ranked 17th in points for, 6th in total yards. Head coach John Harbaugh with the offensive coordinator being Greg Roman. Let's go ahead and head straight to the running back room. J.K. Dobbins, who did not play in 2021, was on the IR with an injured knee all season. Thoughts on J.K. Dobbins?
He's a guy I'm picking up a decent amount of. Like there was a ton of hype around J.K. Dobbins before the injury last year, and then him and Gus Edwards went down in back-to-back practices, or was it the same practice? Like it was crazy how they just kind of fell off the face of the earth, and then they being the Ravens were made to just throw everybody out, right? I like Dobbins. I think he has the potential to finish inside the top 10. Again, as said earlier, like I'd have a real kind of him and hawing between him and Gibson. So he's a guy that I will be keeping a very close eye on the injury report, right? Keeping a very close eye on what it is as they get into training camp, and towards the beginning of the season through the preseason. So I will definitely be monitoring that closely, but I like J.K. Dobbins. I like the fact that he's in a run-first offense. He seemed 2 years ago to really grasp that zone run scheme and help provide some support for Lamar Jackson. So a guy who will be my second, possibly third running back, depending on the format of league that I'm playing in. I have no problem grabbing him and saying, hey, let's give this guy a ride.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at with J.K. Dobbins is got to pay attention to what the latest news is when it comes to, his rehab. And it's so funny because every single one of these running backs I go and click on and look at the latest news articles on them or whatever, of them is every single one of them is rehab is quote going well. Like that's just the standard term for all of these running backs coming back off of injury. Rehab is quote going well. So if his rehab is quote going well, then he's worth taking. It's going to be tough with Gus Edwards back there, and obviously Lamar Jackson being Lamar Jackson. But I think that they're going to try and have more of a focus on Lamar throwing the football, so the running backs will do a lot of the running in those games. Guys, the Ravens last year were such a weird team. Like, I don't know of a team that played more to the level of the competition than Baltimore did. And maybe it was because of the fact that they didn't have, their two running backs that they wanted to have when they started the season. Maybe it was just because Lamar Jackson just found a different gear when it came to playing, big opponents, and then just wouldn't get up for games that, against lesser teams that they should have handled easily. So they were kind of a weird team last year, and obviously losing their two backs was a big deal. But to get back on task here with J.K. Dobbins, I'm also looking for him in the right spot where he's going, probably in that third or fourth round area is where that he's going, which I feel like is a little too low at this point. And I think that's because a lot of people are scared about the injury and how he's coming back from it. But if the news reports keep coming back with his rehab is quote going well, then I'm in.
Right, like it was an ACL that he did, and he did it in like the third preseason game last year. And at this point, right when the regular season kicks in and goes, like that'll be a full year removed on that. We've seen running backs bounce back and play exceptionally well after about 9 months removed from that injury there. So yeah, there's a very real possibility that he comes out the gate swinging and has a very, very good season. I'm thinking that he is a very high end RB2. When it's all said and done, I probably see him somewhere in and around that RB kind of 13, 14, 15 when it's all said and done here for this season. And where you can get him at RB20 off the board is some value there, and really kind of coming off the board in about the 47th pick. So very tail end of the fourth round there. I am all in on J.K. Dobbins with that kind of draft capital, and smash the draft button, move on. This is a guy that should easily see probably 250 plus touches, 250 plus opportunities when it's all said and done on this thing. The Ravens tend to run the ball more than anybody else. Last year, we saw them throw the ball more than they had the previous couple of seasons, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that they were down both of their running backs. They tended to be trailing in games a little bit. You also had Lamar Jackson miss a ton of time through the back half of the year as well. What I think he missed a total of 5 games last year, 5.5 games last year. So he missed almost a third of the season going down the stretch there. So you're going to see Baltimore run the ball a lot more. And with Lamar back there, it makes defenses stay honest with the run and should open up J.K. Dobbins a little bit more so there. So I think he'll finish higher than what you see his ADP going and return value for you. Gus Edwards, he didn't play either in 2021, hit the injured reserve, had an injured knee last year. Thoughts on Gus Edwards?
Gus is, I think I like Gus Edwards. I like drafting him kind of in those middle to later rounds. I think he serves value both as a standalone back in deep leagues, as well as a good handcuff if J.K. Dobbins is unable to go. So he's the guy that I have a lot of attention around, specifically if I'm going to take the chance on J.K. Dobbins early. Because I like what he's been able to do. Harbaugh obviously likes him. That's why they gave him the contract extension. They do give him some goal line work. They're not afraid to spell him or spell Dobbins or whoever's there intermittently with Edwards. They trust him, and being able to get some high end value off of a middle to late round pick in a running back position is like gold in fantasy leagues. So I really like Gus Edwards.
I think I view him more of, and I misunderstood you here, Kevin, but I view him more of a handcuff than I do a standalone value. So
he'll see 10 touches a game.
Right. I guess that's fair. Yeah. And if in a deep league, 10 touches a game, that could help. But I see him more as handcuff. So if you do end up taking J.K. Dobbins, you do need to pay attention to where Gus Edwards is going. Otherwise, you will have to pivot and look somewhere else to keep a part of that Ravens running game going. Because if Dobbins can't go, then Gus Edwards is a very capable fill-in for that. So, but that's where I view him. It's more of a handcuff than as standalone.
I think that he will have standalone, right? Like he's a very, very efficient back, tends to get over 5 yards a carry there. So even if he only gets, 100, 150 touches on that, you'll still see him put up probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 yards. When it's all said and done, you'll see him get some goal line work. He can move a pile, get in there. But absolutely, I see he's gotten some standalone value with a ton of handcuff value on top of that one as well. And where you can take him, love the value that you can get on that one on top of it as well. All righty, let's go ahead and head over to the wide receiver room. Wide receiver, Rashod Bateman was wide receiver 72 last year, 46 receptions, 67 targets, 515 yards, 1 touchdowns, 11.49% target share. Thoughts on Rashod Bateman?
This is probably the biggest unknown right now is now that Hollywood Brown is gone, does Rashod Bateman kind of, I'm not going to say cement himself, but step up and ascend into that true number one position? I think that we're looking at a guy who, probably finishes borderline wide receiver 2 is kind of what my expectation for him is. I think that there's going to be some definite value there, but I think that there's a lot of guys who are really high on Bateman. So I am careful about where and when I will draft him, but the opportunity will be there. He is clearly probably the number 2 option, right? Mark Andrews 1, Rashod Bateman 2.
Mm-hmm.
But in this offense, because of the lack of weapons outside of Andrews and Bateman, I think there's room to feed both of these mouths.
I agree with that. Some Hollywood Brown's targets have to go somewhere, right? So why not Rashod Bateman? Why? That's kind of the mindset that I'm taking. Those targets, they're going to go somewhere. So why not Bateman? Whether or not he makes the most of those targets is up to him. But with where he's going, you pay attention to it. I'm not a huge fan of Baltimore receivers, really any of their receivers. Even when they still had Hollywood Brown, I wasn't real high on him either, just because of how this offense operates. It is a run first through, and then if they're going to pass, you're going to find Mark Andrews. So I guess, I don't know that Rashod Bateman is the guy that I'm specifically targeting. But if I'm there in the, where's he going?
99th overall.
99th.
42nd wide receiver.
So, I mean, at that point, you're pretty well filled out. You're talking about, 10-team league or 12-team league. He's your third wide receiver. Not a bad option, because he's probably going to be the number one wide receiver option, from that receiving room on that team.
Right. I think he'll definitely return some value on that one, right? If he's the 42nd wide receiver coming off the board, I can easily see him getting up into wide receiver 3 territory, even fringe, getting close to fringe wide receiver 2 type of deal there. But keep trade cut question for you. Bateman, Claypool, Allen Robinson. You got to keep trade cut one of them.
I'm keeping Robinson, I'm trading Bateman, and I'm cutting Claypool.
Alex, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. Whenever we do these keep trade cuts, I always think about what can I get in return. That's the first thing that I go to, not who's the best fit for.
All right, let me rephrase that then for you. You got to start one, you got to bench one, you got to cut one.
Okay. I I guess I would still echo the same as Kevin. Start
Okay.
A-Rob, bench Bateman, and cut Claypool.
I think I'm kind of right there as well, right? I think that Allen Robinson probably sees more volume in a more high powered offense that's going to be throwing the ball more, which I kind of like that spot a little bit better. But Rashod Bateman definitely does have some intrigue to him when it's all said and done, from the simple fact that he should be the wide receiver 1 on this team, even though I think that he'll come in second in total target share on this deal, because I don't think that he's going to out target the next guy we're going to talk to. And that is Mark Andrews, who finished tight end number 1, 107 receptions, 154 targets, 1,061 yards, 9 touchdowns, 25.84% target share. Thoughts on Mark Andrews?
I like Mark Andrews. I think I think that there's a very real and a very likely case that he is the number 1 tight end this year. Like, I know people are gravitating towards Kelsey with the lack of options in Kansas City, but Mark Andrews, he just seems much like Kelsey. He seems to find a way to get open and get his no matter what. The perk is Baltimore has a better running game to help balance it out, so teams can't just key in on stopping Mark Andrews. So I have no issue if someone were to take him as the first tight end overall, but realistically you'll get him as the second or third tight end because everyone's in love with Kyle Pitts, and I think that's just kind of built-in value to help you along the way.
I would agree. I mean, obviously he's going to be in the first run of tight ends. He's that top tier tight end. If you are going tight end early, he's one of the ones you have to take. So yeah, I know Kevin loves Mark Andrews. Like, I love watching Darren Waller go off whenever he's playing against Kevin in the home league. That's that's a roundabout inside joke for our league mates.
I hate you all. But I hate you all.
But yeah, I think obviously, you know, this is the guy that he's the guy. He's the option in Baltimore, especially now that they've gotten rid of Hollywood. So I think it's hard to see him having a regression. Does he reach the same numbers that he had last year? Maybe not. I mean, those were pretty stellar numbers that he put up last year. So I think there's the natural regression, just back to, being a human, which we saw with Kelsey, right? Like, we saw him have a monster year and then he regressed because it's hard to duplicate that.
I think it helps if Lamar can stay healthy, though, right? Because he was missing a third of the season. If Lamar's able to stay healthy, I think that you may not see any regression. You might see that improvement of that next step to become the clear number 1 tight end in football.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, obviously he's in that top tier of tight ends. So if you're going to go tight end early, he's obviously, one of the ones you need to consider.
Right. And you said earlier that with Hollywood no longer being there, the targets have to go somewhere. Typically, when you see vacated targets, more often than not, you see them go towards running backs and tight ends, consuming a large chunk of that one. So I don't know that you'll necessarily see that much of a regression in target share here, total number of targets, receptions, things like that. The touchdowns, I think you'll see a very similar touchdown rate on this one. So I am pretty confident on drafting Mark Andrews as, a tight end 1, 2, 3 off the board, because he'll be one of those 3 there. The way I tend to draft, I probably wouldn't take him in a standard redraft because you're talking about a second round pick there, and I usually like spending that one on another running back type of deal there. I'm just really happy that in the home league I get to keep him with a 6th round pick, and we'll take that one all day to the bank, and we'll absolutely love that one. So I'm in on Mark Andrews. Little bit leery of that overall ADP, but again, if you want to go for a positional difference maker, he's a guy that can do it even with that ADP there. So I like it. Let's go ahead and head into the quarterback room. Lamar Jackson, quarterback 15, 246 completions, 382 attempts, 64.4% completion percentage, 2,882 yards, 16 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 134 rushes for 767 yards and 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Lamar Jackson?
Missing 5 games and finishing just outside of QB1 territory. It's not as flashy as it was a couple years ago, right, where Lamar Jackson took the league by storm, but it still works. Like, he is still a top 10 quarterback throughout the course of a season. And I have no issues with anybody taking him as high as 5th overall. Like, if he's your guy, and if that's the guy you want to be the quarterback of your fantasy team, I don't see a huge problem with that, right? The floor barring injury is probably 9 or 10. The ceiling is probably 2 or 3. Like, I don't think we see him finish as QB1 anymore, but I do think that that's probably the range that you can expect given a full complement of 17 games for Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously, just take Lamar Jackson. Like, look, what it's going to go if you're not able to grab Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, or in some of these I'm seeing, Herbert's going 3, and then it's Lamar 4, Kyler 5. Like, he's in that discussion of Herbert, Kyler, Lamar. And at that point, I think it's obviously just personal preference. Like, that's where I think it boils down to. So just whoever you like more, personal preference. And so look, he's a solid quarterback, and he's going to put up his numbers, and he's going to get you bonus rushing points. And perhaps he might even throw in a few bonus rushing touchdowns. But look, we've seen Lamar Jackson now for 4 or 5 years. We know who he is. And even though he's trying to evolve his game into be more of a passer, we still know that he's really dynamic with his legs and can make people miss and still make, defenders look silly. And when the play breaks down, that's when he's at his best. So take him. If he's your guy, take him. Take him wherever you need to take him.
Yeah, I mean, he's coming off the board as the 4th quarterback in most leagues, kind of an overall 51st pick. Absolutely love that kind of position there for him. And through the first half of the season, he was quarterback number 2 overall for fantasy and half-point PPR scoring. In the second half of the season, where he missed, realistically call it 6 games. So he missed 6 of 9 games there, and still came out finishing, ranked 15 there. So he's a guy that is an absolute difference maker and can be a positional advantage for you there as well. And one of those that I think realistically can return value on that one there. Any other thoughts on Lamar Jackson? Alrighty. Well, that's going to take us down to the end of it. Any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Enjoy your playoff hockey. Have fun with these rookie drafts. If you're doing startups, have fun with some of the startups. Do your homework, right? Don't reach. You'll hear this a lot from us as we get in towards redraft season and through this offseason. Don't reach, right? Be smart. Don't get caught up with all the noise on the draft board. Stick to your game, and you'll be better off for it, because there is value in every single one of these rounds if you're patient enough to find it.
Yeah, agree. Pay attention. Don't get suckered into, I know we talk about my guy syndrome. Try to go in with a clear mind and try not to get to my guy if it's not in the right spot, because oftentimes that's going to steer you in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. Well, guys, that's gonna do it for us. Make sure that you head over to the socials: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Good Old Boys FF. Give us the follow there. Lots of great content, as well as the fact, get over to the YouTube channel. Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button and make sure you're catching all the great content that we've got planned coming out for you. For Kevin and Alex, I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe.